And hello, everyone. I am John O'Loughlin, and welcome to McDuff Lives. And tonight's a special night for me. I'm very happy to bring back to the show Nick. I know him as Nick from Twitter. His handle there, Nick at Pizza Pickle Spur. And he is a person that was introduced to me through the work of Mark Kulak at Housatonic Live. And it's so important to me to just keep everything in perspective because my life has turned out to be a kind of a sense of duty to fulfill things that were left unsettled at my father's death. And which I wrote a book about him, it covered his career. And at the end of it, I suggested that his death by cancer is something that I really don't know, but I am very suspicious about. And I had learned about the Special Virus Cancer Program, but didn't know anything further than that by the time that I ran into Nick through our mutual colleague, Mark Kulak, over at Housatonic Live. And so Nick has been able to open the doors of a tremendous amount of literature for me. And I'm starting to really feel more confident about my ability to actually get to the bottom of the question. Was my father murdered by cancer? Was his bout of hepatitis, which came on in a very suspicious way as he was hired the very same time he was hired at the Pentagon to oversee special operations. Anyway, a lot of things that have just lingered in my mind literally for 50 years. And now I've got a chance to resolve the medical side of it. And I can't thank you enough, Nick, for the time you've given me. And I want to spend this evening because I know there's a lot on your mind as well, and I want to give you an opportunity to kind of update my subscribers and the folks that are listening tonight and the people that will listen on the replay, of course, as to what you've been up to lately and uh, just refresh us as to your most recent research.
Thank you very much for having me join you again tonight, John, and hello and good evening to everybody. Thanks for spending part of your Thursday. This is one of those topics that, if you've been on the previous discussions, is very heavy. It weighs on the heart and the mind. And I've watched very recently a lot of people kind of having a wake up experience, just the epiphany of finally getting enough policy and scientific data, the archive, into their own heads, and really having the light bulb go on. It's a very difficult catharsis. And tonight we're not running an echo chamber. We're not looking for a consensus from everyone. We're sharing as investigators what we have seen and learned. And I hope we're both watching very carefully how Occam's razor is cutting through this material, which may include counterintelligence, other narratives that we've been fed, either directly or societally. So this is a heavy one tonight. I just want to forewarn everyone. I've recently had a loss, and my feelings are pretty raw. I'm really going to be focused on keeping a good rational track here. And there's definitely been more activity, discussions, and just continuous digging through the thousands and thousands of pages of virology and medical primatology evidence.
I tell you, I thought I'd never ever have to learn a thing about virology. The whole idea of it sounds very esoteric and hard to grasp. And although I have spent a good bit of time trying to grasp it, I find that it is still elusive. And the idea of it still, it's just too close to the whole Rockefeller medicine thing. And it just really disturbs me that we now have had, 2.5, 3 years of policy being made on the same type of medicine that led to from what I understand, your opinion is that led to AIDS and led to the suffering that continues. And I understand, your friend that you lost recently did suffer from that disease. So, it's just going to get worse. It's not going to get better until we stop it. So I was thinking, a lot of people really took a deep breath when Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announced for presidency, and of course he has been fairly open on his association with anti-vaccine campaigning for many years, and he points out the horrors and the threat of autism and the relationship, but he's always been on the sidelines. He's never been in the camp in on the front in the front row. He's simply been a voice off in the sidelines. But now we have both hope and concern, because we see him, but we also see that he's surrounded by a lot of baggage that he's carried with him. And, I did just briefly before the show ask you if you had any thoughts about RFK, and you did have a concern that you voiced, and I think it would be worthwhile to share that tonight, because I don't think that anybody is going to be a perfect savior for this, god awful mess that our country's in right now. I'd love to find somebody that I could just say I'm okay with them. I would take it, but I want to vet, and I think that this is something that you can add to my knowledge base. So let's just start there. What was your reaction, and how what would you like to add into the discussion about RFK Jr.?
Initially, I felt a sense of interest and enthusiasm about, for lack of a better word, a centrist candidate. Just essentially someone who doesn't seem to feel he has a home in either side. Every time he introduces himself, he says, "I'm a lifelong Democrat, but I am always across the aisle." And he is. I mean, his track record has been about issues, and he's been an attorney. So his career and his focus has been the front line. It's been the cutting edge of these arguments about public safety, quality of medical products, patient injury, full disclosure, informed consent, all of these things. That was very encouraging for me. I didn't think, oh, someone's going to knock Trump off of the table or Biden off of the table. I was particularly intrigued by his track record and the luggage. I mean, he's in all of our minds. We've all, had him in our heads since we saw him pick up the shell casings from his father's funeral procession. That was RFK Jr., wasn't it? Wasn't he the one in the little shorts who ran out and picked up the shells when they did the 10-gun salute, John?
That's something I myself don't remember.
Oh, if you saw the clip, it would click. But I believe that was him. But the point is that the Kennedy issue, the topics and the polarities around the family, and using Kennedy as a punching bag, saying he was immoral and etc., or saying he was a hero and he was going to destroy the CIA and he was going to break down the military industrial complex. We're not going to try to unpack all of that. I was selfishly interested in RFK's recent comment that he wanted to go after Merck. And the reason that was important to me is that Merck was the original institutionalized biowarfare partner of the Defense Department. They partnered with the DoD. They certainly got into that pipeline and became a leader in the very cutting edge work of biowarfare. And it appears through the evidence in the scientific literature, particularly the annual progress reports of what's known as the Special Virus Cancer Program, that Merck not only continued this kind of a role throughout this supposed war on cancer. That's how that program was billed, to Front Street. But they also had a hand in specifically the types of medical experiments, virology, and microbiology that I believe humanized chimpanzee SIV. Now, we can go in the literature today and find any number of examples of humanized this, humanized that. There's a human endogenous retrovirus. There's a great number of pathogens that have that kind of a prefix. Generally, what that means is that there is one or more analogs of that pathogen in the animal kingdom. And what I see from the literature is that Merck was right in there blurring the lines between primate and human science, and in very reckless and dangerous ways. So I had a selfish interest in that promise that he made. I think he did it last summer. He was speaking at a church somewhere. So I was excited about that.
Interesting. And yeah, as I've dug into it, I agree with you that Merck is right in the heart of the Defense Department's efforts to develop bioweapons during and after World War II. And the control that that regime has still, I think, still exists. That brings up one of the interesting questions that was rather current a couple of weeks ago that we haven't talked about, and that was the issue of Sasha Latipova coming out and saying that this is a Defense Department program, and that the pharmas and all is just window dressing, and they never really did do any trials. They just pretended or went through the motions so that they would have some paperwork that the DOD needed. But actually, since it's all under national security, they didn't really have to jump through any of those hoops. And all of that made a big splash, and people started thinking, well, okay, it's the Defense Department, it's the Defense Department. But did you follow that, and do you find that worthwhile to try to sort out the strands of what's from DTRA, what's from DARPA, what's from BARDA, and who does Rick Bright really work for?
I was a young man when all of the very dark mirror of these things that unfolded in the 80s, similar to what we're experiencing today, when people really started going after the lab origin hypothesis of HIV. And I just didn't have the interest or the skills or the maturity to really track with it. I was quite frankly in the throes of PTSD, looking at a future that just looked like a black void of, oblivion, looking at people to the left and the right of me that had no problem making jokes about people getting AIDS and they should have AIDS and it's God's revenge, those kinds of things. So I don't have really the parallels of seeing that blow by blow the way that the whistleblowers did. And what I take away from it as I studied it retrospectively years later was that there was a great deal of what I call sheepdogging. I mean, I didn't coin the term. We all know what that means. Someone barks in an effort to get the herd to move in a certain direction. It's called information management. It's called counterintelligence. There's lots of different ways to slice and dice that. But I saw the signals, including a colleague and I think a close friend of RFK Jr.'s, and that's a Dr. Peter Duesberg. That's another piece of why I'm not over the moon about RFK. I opened his book, I have it, and I counted 228 citations of Peter Duesberg. So I think it's safe to say that as a scientific source and as a trusted source, Duesberg and Kennedy are very close. That impedes my optimism for a meaningful and effective engagement with RFK, whether he's the president or not, about really getting behind the curtain, pulling it back and saying, let's meet the Wizard of Oz. Let's look at all the meters and the levers and the buttons, and let's see how this thing worked. Because that's what I've been doing the actuarial work on for 20 years.
And, folks Peter Duesberg is somebody who was a early controversial. He's a molecular biologist, and he was very, and still, I think, is still controversial in that his theories went against the mainstream. Yet, at the same time, they also seem to have been a well, sheepdogging, or as you put it, leading people off of the actual path. And maybe you should explain that.
Well, this is a tough one. So, folks, just hang on with me here. This is rough, considering what I just went through. There are many people, bench scientists, people from the industries or the specialties in research who came forward with their own ideas, their hypotheses, their explanations originally about what was HIV and where did it come from prior to 1988, when there was a solid announcement that the direct genetic parent was the chimpanzee SIV. That wasn't known or announced until that point. So why Dr. Duesberg's message to the world was especially difficult and costly for people like myself who survived the era is that he popped the bubble for a lot of men who were absolutely shredded with grief and anguish and trauma, and they were trying to remain HIV negative, and they were maintaining their vigilance. And along comes this miraculous biomolecular scientist who just dispels all of the things that they've been struggling to maintain: using condoms, asking for your partner's status, getting an HIV test. And he said, oh, it's all a myth. HIV doesn't cause AIDS. That's because of gay men's toxic lifestyles. And actually, it's their use of poppers which causes Kaposi sarcoma. Well, I've deconstructed Peter's material before in other conversations and streams, so let's not do all of that tonight.
Sure.
But there's a substantial amount of data that absolutely invalidates his words. But that's not it. I'm not just carrying a grudge because somebody came forward with a contrary hypothesis. Men listened to Peter, and they dropped their guard. And they still, followed their carnal needs, as most men do, and they got infected and died. I can name some people. I don't name full names of people that I've lost, but I can name some people who had arguments with me as a young man and tried to say, you need to stop with the condoms and all that nonsense. This is just a big psyop. You just need to lead a good lifestyle. And they went out and got infected, and they're dead now. So this isn't about I want to pull on his white coat and wag my finger at him because of the semantics of the science that he got wrong. This cut through lives. This cut through people who were wonderful, who were living very good lives, who were living optimal health. They were taking the best care that they possibly could, except they dropped their shield. They dropped their guard. So that's another big piece of why I'm not putting him on my Christmas card list.
In more recent times, we now have RFK Jr., and your concerns about his friendship and closeness to a Peter Duesberg, I think, are mirrored by our concerns about what appears to be a developing closeness with Dr. Robert Malone. And that's one that really gives concern to a number of of my colleagues, that such as Mark and David Underdown and others that have been watching closely because of his involvement in the beginning of all this mRNA stuff that he now seems to be going to become a Teflon. Nothing will stick to him, and the concern then is RFK maybe going to just turn out to have been used at some point, where although he says all the right things, and we've seen this how many times in our lives now, where the politician says all the right things, like Obama. Hey, I was supporting Obama in 2008. I was on his campaign committee, and I was working, and I was like, I was hope, I was yes.
Hmm.
And but no, I mean, he didn't close Gitmo, and he didn't do hardly anything, and he did some bad stuff instead, and that's what I think people are afraid of now. But on the other hand, it's so hard to find somebody that you can place some hope in, and so I guess the question is, can Bobby Kennedy Jr. Uh, can all of the good things that he said, and I do believe that it's in his heart the way he delivered it. I do believe that it's in his heart to try to give us a platform where we can actually speak freely, where you can actually put your concerns out there and actually just say, hey, Mr. Kennedy, I'm concerned about this Peter Duesberg. And I think, there's some things that need to be said about Dr. Malone. And let's sit down and talk about these things, as opposed to having him kind of just surrounded by them the way the way the presidents were always surrounded by these evil seeming advisors. So anyway, I guess that's enough on Bobby Kennedy, unless you had anything else. But anything on Robert Malone that you'd like to add?
I have been very fortunate to be in a circle of researchers who are conducting sort of a real-time, constant fact check on Malone.
Mm.
And it is not a gallery of response, right? It's not a thumbs up, thumbs down kind of experience. They are going through his record, his patents, his previous scientific papers, his public appearances, and his positions on things like vaccine safety, disclosure, informed consent, things of those natures. And they are excellent at eking out we'll say, the dichotomy, the balancing act between what we might be seeing as a public persona and what the record actually shows about someone's principles and their conduct, which ultimately reflects your character. So yes, I think that if what appears to be sort of this merging of thought and relationship between the two of them into an alignment means that he might become head of NIAID or head of NIH, that's extremely concerning. And the same reason that you would not go out and ask a fox to guard your hen house. You just wouldn't do it. He doesn't have the cleanliness, the moral cleanliness to be able to say, I'm coming into the role as a national and thereby global health administrator and leader without a great deal of mixed baggage. That's a risk area for me. I don't have to solve that for Mr. Kennedy. And to kind of repeat something that I had a conversation with on Twitter, somebody today was talking with me, and I said, look, my message does not hinge on convincing or getting a virtue signal from the most popular person in mainstream media, because a lot of people keep nudging me, pushing me towards Anderson Cooper or this person in the BBC or this person in Guardian. I mean, think the brands I'm naming here, and you're like, well, there's no objectivity. There's no opportunity for true journalistic integrity to bring evidence forward, whether or not it's embarrassing or damaging to somebody, no matter how powerful they are or how self-important they've made themselves to be. So I said to this person, look, I appreciate that. And that was the point that I think I really started at in 2017 when that was the first time I got on Twitter. I wasn't on these social media platforms for years and years and years. I was busy with other things. But I got on and I went to the big names, started with the liberals and the gays and lesbians. There's not very many of those in media. They were all at CNN and MSNBC. Nothing back from them. Went to more conservatives, tried to find people that had a proclaimed history of whistleblower, etc. That kind of a champion No response. Crickets, crickets, crickets. So this is a huge package of data, and it's very difficult once people actually digest it to begin processing and integrating it morally with their worldview. That's for people that are willing and actually focus on the details. If you just come out as an internet rando to one of these journalists, you're going to be, water on Teflon. It just doesn't work. So my point was in all of that is that I have been, since those early tweets back in 2017, I have been much more successful in connecting with bench scientists and historical scientists, people with a broad understanding of the arc of microbiology, virology, and biowarfare, things of that nature. And I'll tell you, this is very exciting. Most recently, I'm connecting with Tuskegee study scholars, which was also brought to us Americans by the NIH, and South African investigators. Now, I can't name names. We'll have, I'll make sure that people are aware when those conversations happen. We want to make sure that they're good conversations, not that we're rushing to press, because we're not, this effort is not about getting clicks or views or likes. It's about the successful, effective, and coherent translation of this huge body of research to the general public, most of which will not apply themselves to it. So they will be left with this kind of nausea of, that sounds really horrible. I don't want to believe it. It's much easier to click on Google and look at the top 3 returns of what Google tells me about conspiracy theorists about HIV. Those are the struggles that I encounter. But the point is that I'm making inroads with the people that really matter, who can argue and recognize the microscopic footprints, the breadcrumbs, as they went from learning about all these primate pathogens with their sloppy science in the 50s to weaponizing them in the 60s and 70s.
Well, one of your main points that we talked about the last time we got together, and I found it to be actually one of those things that made me feel kind of uncomfortable, was when you said, and it's your opinion, and I think, well-founded after going through it with you, that this insertion of simian viruses into humans is an effort to create a bioweapon. And I had never really been willing to face that. I know that I've read and studied Dr. Mary's Monkey by Ed Haslam, and gone and interviewed him, and I did know a good bit about what he had reported on SV40 and the what appears to have been a causation of things like the prostate cancer that I got, 40 years after taking the sugar cube for polio, and that this connection with these monkey viruses, according to the Judith Ferry Baker story, may very well have been an attempt to try to prevent people from getting cancer. And in other words, it's always been possible for me to believe that all this stuff was unfortunate, accidental. The best minds often can't make mistakes. They're on the edge of this very dangerous subject. But no, I think, from what you've told me, and it's your opinion, and this is part of what makes it so hard. But if you've got the facts, if your opinion is well founded, then it's going to come out and people are going to have to face it. And so remind us, why is it that you believe that this is not just trying to fix a health problem, but actually trying to learn how to kill people with these, with by creating these viruses, or whatever they're going to call them, the pathogens, by the biowarfare pathogens?
Thank you for the question. Can you see the file that I'm sharing?
I can bring it up.
If you would, please. I'll see your request to answer that,
Oh,
not
yeah.
with my words, but with the words of history. This is one of the straws that broke the camel's back for me, friends. I did not begin this path believing any of this. I was an absolutely unqualified and vacuous mouth breather. I didn't know science from a hole in the ground. I had the competence to learn all of this stuff, but I was a kid. And when I heard these hypotheses to begin with, I discounted them. I just said, nope, those people are, they've got, they're just conspiracy theorists. I repeated that old chestnut, which by the way, entered the American lexicon as the result of a CIA decision in 1967, when they decided, in trying to shut down public dissent over the Kennedy panel, over his assassination, they said, we need a brand. We need something that we can put out there that everyone will remember, and it will become a very, household phrase used to ridicule and denigrate someone that's bringing forward evidence that we don't want in the public domain. So that's when they created and started pushing the phrase conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorist. We've got that artifact. It's out in the public domain. You're welcome to it. Now, back to your question, John. This is the straw. I didn't believe it. This is when I heard the ice cracking. This is a quote from the leader of Army Research and Technology at the time in 1969. And he is discussing in a sub-appropriations committee. For those of you not familiar, that means a funding committee, a specific biowarfare capability that they are offering to Congress in exchange for another burst of funding. Now, before I read this, as I see in the literature, they already had, they were well on their way to this capability. We don't need to unpack all of that at this moment. But I'm saying that very commonly, when scientists apply for a grant, they already have data. They've already done or been involved in some kind of pre-work, which gives substantiation, right? Credibility, feasibility to the investigation that they're hoping to get funded. I think that holds true right here. Let's listen to what Dr. MacArthur offered Congress, US Congress, in 1969. Quote, within the next 5 to 10 years, it would probably be possible to make a new infective microorganism which could differ in several important aspects from any known disease-causing organisms. Most important of these is that it might be refractory to the immunological and therapeutic processes upon which we depend to maintain our relative freedom from infectious disease.
And that is, you can't deny that's what they're saying. And this is right before Nixon then supposedly, uh, closed down our offensive bioweapon research. But of course, that was just a fig leaf for the public. The research went on, did it not?
It did. And let's talk about how we come to that determination. That isn't paranoia. That isn't an assumption. We can measure that at the microscopic level, because the definition and the categorization of the kinds of experiments that were occurring prior to that public announcement in November of 1969, when Nixon went on TV and said, no more offensive biowarfare, all of those projects continued. I know because I've got the annual progress reports. The project in which Dr. Robert Gallo began under the biowarfare firm Lytton Bionetics in 1962, titled Investigations of Viral Carcinogenesis in Primates, continued all the way until 1977, when they closed down the temporary status of the SVCP and integrated all of those new, what they called recombinant DNA technologies, into active departments at the NIH. Now we call it gain of function, but that's what the parent of GOF was. It was called recombinant DNA technology. And this meant damaging or attenuating one or more target pathogens and then recombining it with other pathogens, and then studying and repeating the cycle once you observe and isolate their progeny. Coming back to Peter Duesberg for just a moment, one of the reasons why I feel such a vehemence for him was not just because of the deaths that his language and his message caused in my community, but because I have evidence that Dr. Duesberg was employed under SVCP contracts while at Berkeley. I've got a paper right here that shows him mixing cancer-causing pathogens from birds, avian, leukemia, and sarcoma viruses, and then opining and discussing the interesting progeny that they create. Essentially, it creates a whole Brady Bunch. We call that now a viral swarm. But what the technique is forcing two pathogens that cannot really integrate or reproduce in nature, but forcing them through these attenuation techniques to fuse together and become something new that didn't exist in nature before.
And that was going on since 1962. And then in 1969, then Dr. MacArthur makes his statement. The same year, Nixon passes his rule that no more. But it goes on behind the scenes, and that ultimately leads to things like the bioweapons in China and in Ukraine and in where else around the world have they placed these things. Is it going to come out, Nick? Are the American people ever going to really have to face it? I know they don't want to, but are they going to have to?
Well, I am driven by the love and the friendship and the meaning of all of those people that I have lost. And that's the thing about a martyr, is you can't kill them again. So I have an unlimited well of light that I draw from. And my objective is not to try and make some sociologic statement about homosexuality or to change our culture war that we're engaged in about, everyone's concerns about the trans issue or any of that. My objective is to get the ball over the line, and I've already done it. This is a post-mortem for us because all of the materials that are evidentiary to this hypothesis have been conveyed to hundreds of other people around the world. They've got it. There isn't a website that the Fed can just take down and they're going to shut me up. If somebody kicks in my door and puts a bullet in my head, I want you all to know I love my family and I love my loved ones and I have everything to live for. There is a 0% interest or despair in my approach to this work. Quite the contrary. This is I'm made of adamantium now. And as I poke my claws through the canvas that's been painted for everyone all these years, some people are not coming to the party. They're not going to accept it. Just like people gather around a personality or a politician, and no matter what kind of evidence is afforded them, they will not change their position. Again, this is not a consensus party. This is about ensuring that the right kind of minds have access to the scientific data, to the whole structure of how it occurred. And in the course of doing 20 years of actuarial checking and triple checking, I think that it's quite a compelling story.
You've put together some great teaching materials. You have a kind of a short little course that people can go through, slideshows, and that goes through the whole details of what we've been outlining tonight. And I think, you've been able to present those at various forums. And if folks are interested in having Nick make a presentation, perhaps an online presence in your community, well, I'm sure he'd be interested. I really think that he's on the right track, and I think that we have to support people like Nick who have been doing all this research for 20 years. Um, I want to ask you about more contemporary uh, problems for the last couple of minutes we have. Um,
Absolutely.
we have a colleague, JJ Cooey, who you've been interacting with, or for I guess a couple of years. I think you were both part of uh, a kind of a community that was looking into the sources of the recent um, pandemic. And could you would you speak to us about your what you've learned and relationship with JJ Cooey of GigaOM Biological? And the reason is that find him to be a very fascinating source, and I've been looking at his material on Twitch at GigaOM Biological for about a month now, and I find myself pretty impressed with his analysis of what really went on and is continuing to go on. So I'm sure you may have a couple of thoughts about Nick, about JJ's work. He is a professional biologist of very high standing.
I am acquainted with JJ through his stream, and I would like to just be very clear and coherent about the nature of what you've described as far as our connection. He follows me on Twitter.
Hmm.
I follow him on Twitter. I have attended his streams and shared some chat items and some links to material. There has never been a word spoken directly between he and I.
Oh,
My invites to engage have never been met. We've never closed the loop. That was where we started some time ago, about 2 years ago, of yeah, let's get together, let's get the conversation going. And as he has moved into his current analysis and his materials, I just don't think that I'm going to be someone that has a conversation with him, simply because
okay.
I don't feel any kind of interest. There's no reciprocation. Now, I realize that these streams live in perpetuity. I have also watched different parties that used to kind of be in the same camp of lab origin investigation bifurcate. And I've watched those parties turn it into a purse fight, including JJ playing other people's streams, talking about him, and then talking back to them. And then they play his stream doing that, and they talk back to him, talking to them, talking about them,
All right.
and it
Well,
turns into a house of mirrors. So at this point, I think that anybody that wants to engage, he is a former professor. He certainly is a lettered scientist. I do understand he has bench science experience. But as far as our alignment, I don't. I think it's a non-issue.
okay. And I'm sorry I asked. I don't certainly didn't
No, it's
want
okay.
to go there.
It's okay. All right.
I was really more interested in his infectious clones theory, and whether that is something you've investigated. And but obviously there's that's probably not going to happen. And I speak to an awful lot of people, and I'm not trying to advance anyone's agenda. I just am looking for consonants. I'm looking for things that resonate together, that make sense. And so I'm just going to keep having an open mind, and I do follow him, and I do learn because I don't know anything about biology, and so some basic stuff. And anyway, enough about that.
Sure. Sure.
Well, anyway, and it is hard, and it's gosh, you've made s- I don't know what else to say except for I'm terribly sorry for your recent loss and for the losses of so many people over the decades from this horrible event. And what else can we do but try to expose it? It does look like you're right to me. I want you to have a bigger platform. I want you to have more. I wish that there was some way that people could engage with you at a big um, at a RFK Jr. level, because that the world does need to confront your issues, and you speak very well, um, and it's from the heart. So anyway, thank you so much, Nick.
Absolutely. I wanna let you know I also have a very strong passion about the changes that have occurred in the food supply, and I'm speaking specifically about the exact same kind of shell game that occurred in introducing GMOs
Mhm.
into publicly available food as they just did with the mRNA products, right? They created, instead of doing testing for all of these modified plants, and particularly the glyphosate based herbicides that are sprayed on most all conventional foods today, instead of doing testing, the agri-pharma folks went to George Bush Sr. And there's historical footage of him walking through an experimental plant lab and saying, when you get to Washington, if you encounter any barriers, you just come and talk to me, because that's my business, is to break down regulations. And instead of testing it before your child began consuming a soy-based infant formula or any number of other dozens of products and derivatives from GMO plants that we've all been consuming now for about 30 years, instead of doing the safety testing, the Bush administration created something called the principle of substantial equivalence. And that said basically that a GMO tomato looks and smells and weighs about the same, tastes about the same as a conventional heirloom tomato. So it's the same thing.
Yeah.
They waved their hands in the air. The point of that being is that if you take someone from Bayer Monsanto, because they've got an entire army that have been fighting, the cancer issue, the glyphosate toxicity issue for decades now. You put them in a room with a parent who has struggled to fix the health of their family and has done it through altering the diet. You put them together and they will never meet. There will never be a bridge. There'll just be a river that runs between them. So part of this is not for me to get up and have purse fights with dissenting opinions. I'm willing to do it. But if they will not allow the presentation of actual evidence, if they just want to do the classic attack your scientist opponent, then if you can't break down their hypothesis, attack their credibility, which is not science. If that's their technique, we can see that pretty quickly. They'll make that very clear. But I'm just saying that the objective here is not to get a victory in the public court of opinion. It's to ensure that the continuity of the research that began with Dr. Robert Strecker, his brother Teddy Strecker, their publicist Jack Carpenter, Dr. Alan Cantwell, investigative journalist Tom Curtis, Dr. Leonard Horowitz, and investigative journalist Ed Hooper, to name just the leading whistleblowers, that their work lives on in perpetuity. It's available just like a court case, John, just like discovery, and that everyone has the opportunity to view both the argument and the counter argument and weigh the evidence. And what I am doing when I make those little 100, 200, 300 level videos is to help up people's basic technical competence, to encourage them to understand that they can grasp the concepts of virology, vaccinology, and in particular, the iatrogenic history of injury and death that has occurred since the 1950s, when our science really took a turn. So that's the goal. And like I said, the ball, we've got a touchdown. We're going for the field goal now.
That word iatrogenic is one of my pet peeves. You think of the doctors. They write it down. Oh, this disease was iatrogenic. Well, the other doctors, they understand that the guy got sick in the hospital. He got a bug when he was getting surgery, or it was in other words, it was caused by the medical system. but they use this obscure word, iatrogenic, so that nobody else is going to realize that, oh, wait a minute, you mean the hospital caused this? Well, maybe I should call a lawyer.
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
just obscuring it. Language is a weapon that they know very well how to use.
Yes, it is. And, just doing basic, well, you don't have to use any big ology words. Doing basic research, reading, and watching vocabulary get swapped out for the new version, right? It starts by being called simian virus, whatever. We'll just make it up. Simian virus 5. And then the next thing you know, a few years later, it's now called Epstein-Barr virus or Mason-Pfizer monkey virus, or any number of other pathogens like respiratory syncytial virus. That's its second name, friends. It was originally called chimpanzee coryza agent, and it got into human health, as best we can tell, all in this same area of messy primate human science interaction, using primate materials to produce products that go into our bodies without any technical competence to assure that all, the whole host, the catalog of things that these primates can carry, which may not be dangerous to their health, but could be fatal to us, making sure that that stuff isn't in there. Well, they knew about the contamination by 1960. There's an amazing pathologist who's since passed away named Cecil Fox. And he discusses, his opinion was they should have stopped using primary cell culture in 1960 at the SV40, big meeting at Cold Spring Harbor. But instead, they allowed Maurice Hilleman at Merck to write a paper and assert that their process of using some formalin, it's a formaldehyde derivative that's used to inactivate cultures. It's supposed to kill non-target pathogens. That using formalin clears out all of that danger from all of anything that might be in there, including things they hadn't even characterized yet. And they allowed that to just sweep the SV40 topic under the rug. But of course, in parallel, as the 60s went on, they built a cancer industry.
So much more to talk about, Nick. Hillerman is a whole story. We could spend an hour on him easily. But the point is, folks, we've got to let everybody entertain, use critical thinking. The idea that there has been a secret military bioweapon development program ever since World War II, and it involves the mixture of monkey and other animal pathogens and human pathogens going into the simians and then coming back and going back and forth, doing all kinds of exotic mixtures to create zoonotic creatures that are pathogens that never could have existed in nature. That we've been doing this on purpose, intentionally, for whatever purpose, probably for somebody's crazy idea of megalomaniac control of the whole world. This is unbelievable stuff. But look at what's happened. Look at how our people have been decimated, and especially those in target populations such as Nick's. So it takes a great deal of courage, and it takes a lot of guts and fortitude to come forward with what you've done, Nick. And I applaud you, and I thank you, and I wish you Godspeed with your work.
Well, thank you very much. And everyone, thank you for spending an hour with us tonight with such a heavy, heavy topic. And I want to close with a beam of light. I'm right now going back and rewatching ACT UP New York documentaries and watching men and women who fought against this kind of a situation when no one else in the world was really pushing for them, when they had to do it all for themselves. And boy, I'm taking notes. So guess what, friends? There is no big bad that we cannot uncover. And as soon as you bring a vampire out into the sunlight, they burst into flame. So I'm getting my marshmallow sticks ready. Let me tell you, friends.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks again, Nick from Twitter. And folks, you can see his program. You can catch him on Twitter and find Nick. Is there a good spot for them to find those classes, those 100, 200 slideshows you've done?
Yes, I've got a consolidated Rumble and We Talk, You Listen live channel. The WTL channel has a little more historical documentaries on it, and they are all used in an open source educational format. So I'll put those tweets out. If you guys can see my handle here, you don't have to follow me. Just come and look at my time stream and then click on the links. And there are some excellent videos, including, I won't tell you what, a very recent Easter egg from a Minnesota state Republican talking about we'll say a briefing that he received as a young Republican in the 80s. That's something to go and dig up if you want an Easter egg.
All right. Thanks again.